There are $150 that I will never forget, not because of what they were worth, but because of what collecting them would have cost. A man stood in my courtroom on a Tuesday morning in December, 52 years old, hands like worn leather, a jacket repaired with thread the wrong shade of blue, and a charge that the system considered routine: vagrancy, public disturbance, fine assessed. Next case. The officer's report was clean. The law was clear. On paper, everything pointed in one direction. But I have been on this bench for 41 years, and I have learned that paper is the last place you find the truth about a person. Because what the report did not say was why he was there. What the citation did not capture was what that man had been doing every single Sunday morning for 4 months. The performance he had been giving, alone, in a gas station bathroom, so that someone who loved him would never have to know. There was a reason beneath the reason, a weight beneath the charge. Something that, the moment he finally spoke it aloud in that courtroom, made the entire room go silent. And when I asked him the one question that changed everything, what he said next made me stand up, walk down from my bench, and do something I had never done in 41 years of wearing that robe. Stay with me. This one matters. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, empathy, and hidden truths resonate with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. There are cases I carry with me the way old men carry photographs, not in wallets, but somewhere deeper, pressed flat against the chest where no one can see them. I have sent men to prison. I have dissolved marriages. I have read verdicts that made mothers collapse in the back row of my courtroom. After 41 years on this bench, you would think a man grows a kind of professional skin, thick enough to keep the cold out. You would be wrong. The truth about justice, the truth they never teach in law school, is that the law is written in ink and applied in flesh. And flesh remembers. Flesh bleeds. Flesh sleeps on frozen sidewalks when the world stops caring whether it lives or dies. I learned that truth again on a Tuesday morning in December. The courthouse heating system had been running since before dawn, and by 9 o'clock the air inside courtroom 4 was heavy, the kind of warmth that sits in your lungs and makes you forget, if you're comfortable enough, that 4 degrees below zero waited just beyond the glass. I remember noticing it that morning, the warmth, the way it felt like a privilege. My clerk read the docket. 17 cases that day, parking violations, a noise complaint, a minor civil dispute over property damage, the usual choreography of small human failures that fill the hours of a working judge. Case number 12 was listed as a vagrancy citation, $150. I almost moved past it the way you move past a crack in a sidewalk, noting it, stepping over it, continuing. But then the door opened. He came in slowly, not the slowness of arrogance. I know that walk well. The shoulders back, the jaw set, the eyes that say you don't have anything on me. This was different. This was the slowness of a man who has learned, through long and patient suffering, that walking too fast only calls attention to where you have no right to be. He was 52 years old, though he moved like 65. Medium height, the kind of broad shoulders that speak of decades of physical work. Not the gym kind, but the real kind. The kind that loads, lifts, hauls, and doesn't complain about it. His hands were resting on the rail of the witness stand, and I could see them from my bench, calloused, cracked at the knuckles, the fingernails carrying the permanent shadow of labor that soap cannot fully reach. His jacket was a faded navy synthetic. The color had given up somewhere around 3 winters ago. There was a tear at the left shoulder, mended with thread the wrong shade of blue, done carefully, done by someone who knew the jacket had to last. His work trousers were khaki, stained at the thighs with grease that had become part of the fabric. His shoes. I looked at his shoes. The sole on the left one had begun to separate from the upper. Someone had pressed it back with what looked like electrical tape. It had not held. He stood with his shoulders drawn in, not hunched in guilt, but contracted, the way people make themselves smaller when they have learned that taking up space is something the world charges you for. He did not look up when he entered. He did not look up when his name was called. He looked up only when I said it, not as the court required, but the way I said it, quietly. The way you say a name when you want someone to know you see them. Raymond. His eyes met mine. Brown. Exhausted in the way that goes past sleep and becomes something else. A tiredness of the soul that rest alone can't fix. But there was something else in them, too. Something intact. Something that poverty and cold and months of invisible suffering had not managed to extinguish. Dignity. The stubborn, quiet, undefeated kind. I folded my hands on the bench. Outside, December pressed its full weight against the courthouse windows. Inside, the heat hummed, and I looked at Raymond Coates, fined $150 for the crime of being cold and having nowhere to go. And I felt the familiar ache I have never learned to suppress. Not pity, never pity, recognition. The clerk read the citation aloud the way clerks do, without malice, without feeling, the voice of the system functioning exactly as designed. Defendant Raymond Coates, age 52. Citation issued December 11th, 3:47 a.m. Oak Street, Downtown District. Violation. Vagrancy and public disturbance. Officer responding noted subject was lying on the public sidewalk, obstructing pedestrian access. In temperatures recorded at -4 degrees Celsius. Fine assessed. $150. Defendant has no prior record. $150. I have heard larger sums discussed in this courtroom with less gravity. Traffic fines, parking disputes, civil penalties that meant nothing to the people paying them. Numbers spoken the way you speak the weather, but $150, I have learned, is not always the same number. It depends entirely on whose hands it has to come from. The prosecutor, a young man, competent, doing his job with the clean efficiency of someone who had not yet had reason to question the architecture of the system he served, stood and presented the case in 4 minutes. The officer's report, the temperature reading, the location, the time, the obstruction, the fine, everything correct, everything legal, everything perfectly indifferent to the man standing 6 feet away from me, in a jacket that had been repaired with the wrong color thread. I watched Raymond as the words landed. He did not flinch. He did not protest. He stood with his hands resting on the rail, those ruined, honest hands, and he listened to the story of his own suffering being recited as a municipal infraction, with the patience of someone who had stopped expecting the world to narrate his life accurately. The public defender assigned to him was a young woman with a heavy caseload and a coffee cup she hadn't put down since entering the room. She said what she could, that her client had no prior record, that the citation was his first contact with law enforcement, that she respectfully requested the court consider a payment plan given her client's current financial circumstances. Current financial circumstances. I wrote nothing on my notepad. There are moments in a courtroom when the machinery of justice becomes suddenly, grotesquely visible. All gears and levers and rubber stamps, and you see it for what it is, a system designed to process, not to understand. A mechanism that measures behavior against statute and produces outcomes with the emotional range of a calculator. On paper, this case was simple. Man found sleeping on public property. Fine issued. Fine to be collected. Case closed. Next. The paper, as always, was missing the most important parts. I looked at Raymond. He was looking at a fixed point somewhere to the left of my bench. Not the wall, not the floor, but that middle distance people stare into when they are holding themselves together through sheer concentration. I let the silence sit for a moment, long enough for the room to shift. There is a technique some judges use, filling silence with authority, with pronouncements, with the sound of certainty. I have always believed the opposite, that silence, properly held, opens people. That the right question, asked quietly into a room that has gone still, can reach places that legal proceedings never touch. I leaned forward slightly, just enough. Raymond, how long have you been out of work? He blinked. The question had not come from the direction he expected. He turned his eyes to me slowly, recalibrating. 8 months, he said. His voice was low, steady. The voice of a man who had been talking to no one for a very long time, and had learned to keep the register even so it didn't break. 8 months. And before that, 12 years at Garrison Packaging on Route 9. Line supervisor. I nodded. Not to congratulate him, not to perform empathy. I nodded the way you nod when something confirms what you already suspected, when the shape of a life becomes legible all at once. What happened to the job? He was quiet for 3 full seconds. I counted them. They automated the line, brought in machines for what we did, said it was more efficient. He paused. I was the last one they told. The last one they told. I wrote that down, not for the record, for myself. And where have you been living, Raymond, since August? Another pause. Shorter this time. The shame of it had already been spoken out loud so many times inside his own head, that finding words for it in public was simply a matter of choosing which ones to use. My car until November. He stopped. Then sold it. Why? He looked at me directly for the first time since entering the room. The look of a man deciding whether the person asking the question deserves the true answer. Needed to eat, he said. That's all. That's all. The room was very quiet. The heating system hummed. Someone shifted in a chair behind me. The young prosecutor had stopped writing. The public defender had finally put down her coffee. I set my pen on the bench, folded my hands, and I asked the question that I already knew would unravel everything. Not because I needed the answer, but because Raymond needed to give it. Because some truths can only begin to heal once they have been spoken into a room where someone is actually listening. Raymond, I said. He met my eyes. Why didn't you ask your family for help? He didn't answer right away. I have watched thousands of people stand in that spot over 41 years. I have seen guilt confess itself in the first 30 seconds. I have seen innocence declare itself with a kind of furious, trembling energy that fills the whole room. I have seen arrogance dress itself in victimhood and victimhood mistake itself for shame. What I saw in Raymond Coates in that moment was none of those things. What I saw was love, the specific self-destroying kind, the kind that builds walls around its own suffering so that the people it loves most never have to see the rubble. He took a breath, slow, controlled. The breath of a man who has rehearsed composure for so long it has become indistinguishable from strength. I have a daughter, he said. Lives in Oregon. Her and her husband and 2 kids. I waited. She calls me every Sunday, 10 in the morning. He stopped. His jaw moved once, tightening, releasing. I take the call from a gas station bathroom on 5th. Been doing that since September. The room had gone completely still. Even the heating system seemed to hold its breath. What do you tell her? I asked. He looked down at his hands on the rail. Those hands that had worked 12 years in a factory that replaced them with a machine. Those hands that had sold a car to buy groceries. Those hands that had pressed electrical tape against a separating soul and willed it to hold one more day. I tell her I'm in the middle of moving, he said, that the new apartment's almost ready, that everything's fine. He paused. She's got enough. Her husband was laid off last spring. She doesn't need to know her father is... He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I heard it anyway. The word he couldn't say in a room full of strangers. The word that had been living in his chest for 4 months, pressing against his ribs every Sunday morning when his daughter's voice came through the phone, warm and ordinary, and full of the assumption that her father was okay. I removed my glasses. I am not a man who cries in his courtroom. I made that decision early in my career, and I have kept it with the same discipline I have kept every other professional commitment. But there is a kind of grief that does not require tears to be visible. It sits in the set of a jaw, in the deliberate way a man breathes, in the extra second before words come. I set my glasses on the bench. "Raymond," I said, "look at me." He looked up. "I want you to understand something. What happened to you is not the result of a personal failure. You worked for 12 years. You paid your taxes. You showed up. And the system that benefited from your labor for over a decade discarded you without ceremony and without conscience. You did not end up on that sidewalk because you were weak. You ended up there because you were failed. There is a profound difference between those two things, and I need you to hear it clearly." Something shifted in his face. Not relief, not yet. Something earlier than relief. The expression of a man hearing a truth he had almost stopped believing was true. I stood. The court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. I have never been comfortable with the theater of this bench, the elevation of it, the deliberate architecture of authority it represents. In that moment, I felt it acutely. The distance between where I stood and where Raymond stood felt obscene. I came down the 2 steps from the dais and stood at floor level, in the open space between the bench and the witness rail, the way I do when the occasion demands that the law remember it was made for people, not the other way around. "Raymond Coates," I said, "on the charge of vagrancy and public disturbance as filed under citation 4471B, I am dismissing the fine in full. Case is closed." I heard a breath release somewhere in the gallery, but I was not finished. I reached up and I removed my robe. I had worn that robe for 39 of my 41 years on the bench. It was not a theatrical gesture. I want to be clear about that. It was not performance. It was simply the only honest response I had to offer a moment that the law had no language for. Beneath it I wore the gray wool coat I had brought that morning. A good coat, heavy, the kind that keeps out a December that means business. I walked to the witness rail. Raymond watched me come with the eyes of a man who could not yet decode what was happening, but had learned, through long months of hard experience, to be very careful about hope. I lifted the coat and placed it over his shoulders. He was taller than me by 2 inches. The coat sat differently on him than it did on me. It looked, I thought, exactly right. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "That's all right," I said quietly. "You don't need to say anything." But he did say something. Not loudly. Not for the record. Just 4 words, spoken with the particular rawness of a man whose defenses had finally, completely, and mercifully given way. He said, "I forgot how this feels." I have turned those words over in my mind many times since that morning. I forgot how this feels. The weight of what is packed inside a sentence that simple. The months of cold and concrete and pretending. The Sunday morning phone calls from a gas station bathroom. The electrical tape on the shoe. The thread the wrong shade of blue. To forget the feeling of being seen. Of being warm. Of mattering to another person enough that they would cross a room toward you rather than away. I forgot how this feels. His shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in release. The specific, involuntary unburdening of a body that has been braced against the world for so long, it had forgotten it was braced. He bent his head forward, and Raymond Coates, 52 years old, former line supervisor at Garrison Packaging on Route 9, a man who had been selling his possessions one by one to stay alive, while pretending to his daughter that everything was fine. He wept, not loudly, with great dignity actually, the crying of someone who has spent months training themselves not to, and for whom the sudden permission of it arrives like the first rain after a very long drought. Quietly, completely, his shoulders moving once, twice, and then going still. I waited. Then I said, "The court's social services liaison will meet with you this afternoon, Raymond. There is a municipal reintegration program for workers over 50. We are going to make sure you are referred today, not next week. Today." He nodded. He couldn't speak. I returned to the bench. I put my glasses back on. I picked up my pen. I brought the gavel down once, gently. The courtroom emptied the way courtrooms always do after something real has happened inside them. Slowly, quietly, with people moving toward the doors as though leaving a church. Not rushing, not talking, processing. I watched Raymond from the bench as the social services liaison, a woman named Patricia, who had worked with my court for 11 years, and who understood without being told when a case required more than a referral form, crossed the room and placed her hand briefly on his arm. He listened to her with the focused attention of a man receiving instructions he intends to follow precisely. He nodded twice. He folded the paper she gave him and placed it in the inside pocket of the gray wool coat. He looked up once before he left, just once, at me. I gave him a small nod, the kind that means, "I see you. Go." He went. I sat with the remaining cases that morning and I did my work. 17 cases as scheduled. I was present for all of them, but I will tell you honestly that a portion of my mind stayed with Raymond for the rest of that day. Walking out through the courthouse doors into the December cold, a gray wool coat on his shoulders, and a folded paper in his pocket. Moving through a city that had spent 4 months looking straight through him. I thought about his daughter. Her voice coming through his phone every Sunday at 10 in the morning, warm and ordinary. The gas station bathroom, the performance of normalcy he had maintained week after week with the discipline of a man who had decided that his suffering was his alone to carry. I thought about my own father, his hands at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, the sounds he made that he thought no one could hear. I thought about the word invisible, how it is used so casually, as metaphor, as social commentary, as the title of books and the subject of speeches, and how it is also for some people simply a description of their daily life, a literal condition, the experience of moving through public space and registering in no one's awareness, of being present and absent simultaneously, of mattering to the people who love you and to no one else. Raymond had been invisible to the city for 4 months. For 11 minutes in courtroom 4 on a Tuesday morning in December, he had not been. I have always believed that is what this bench is for. Not the pronouncement of penalties, not the administration of fines, the restoration of visibility, the insistence, on behalf of the law and against the indifference of systems, that the person standing in front of you is a person with a history, with love in their life, with a daughter who calls every Sunday at 10, with hands that know how to work, and a soul that knows how to endure, and a coat that is finally warm enough. 6 months later, Patricia left a note on my desk. I still have it. It said, "Raymond Coates completed the workforce reintegration program. Placed as receiving and inventory supervisor at Kellerman Distribution. Full-time, benefits included. Start date March 3rd. He asked me to tell you he called his daughter." I read that note 3 times. Then I folded it and put it in my desk drawer, in the back, where I keep the things I return to when the work becomes heavy, and I need to remember why I chose it. He called his daughter. I don't know what he said to her. I don't know how that conversation began or how long it lasted, or whether she cried or whether he did, or whether they simply sat in the particular silence of 2 people who love each other and have just remembered, with relief, that the other one is still there. I don't know any of that. I know only that a man who had been calling his child from a gas station bathroom every Sunday for months, performing wellness he did not feel, protecting her from a truth she had every right to know. That man had finally put down the performance, had finally trusted that love, real love, the kind built over decades and not destroyed by a season of hardship, could hold the weight of the truth. That is not a small thing. That is, in my experience, everything. There is a version of justice that counts, that measures, that converts human experience into columns of figures and renders verdicts the way a machine renders outputs, clean, consistent, and cold. I have watched that version of justice operate for 41 years. I understand its function. I respect its necessity. But I have also watched a man stand in my courtroom in a coat repaired with the wrong shade of thread. And I have understood, in the way that bypasses argument and goes straight to the bone, that there is another version. A version that asks not only what did you do, but why did you do it? And what happened to you? And who are you when the world isn't watching? And what do you need to be able to walk back out into it? That version is harder. It costs more. It requires you to come down from the bench sometimes and stand on the same floor as the person in front of you. I have always thought it was worth it. Raymond Coates taught me that again on a December morning when the cold outside was -4 and the heating system in courtroom 4 was running too warm, and a man with electrical tape on his shoe stood before me charged with the crime of having nowhere to sleep. I gave him a coat. He gave me back my faith in why any of this matters. If this story reached something in you, stop for just a moment and ask yourself honestly, have you ever carried a burden in silence, not because you had no one to turn to, but because you loved them too much to let them see you struggling? Have you ever looked at someone and seen only what the surface showed, the worn jacket, the tired eyes, the circumstances, without stopping to ask what brought them there? And have you ever been in a room where one person chose to cross toward you instead of away, and felt in that moment what it means to be truly seen? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about compassion, dignity, and the kind of justice that begins by seeing the whole person, not just the charge, subscribe to this channel. We'll see you in the next case.